look like.
I feel like this computer is getting slower and slower.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's the keyboard sometimes.
sometimes I think it might be the keyboard.
Yeah,
Do we want to get some batteries for it?
maybe. Probably worthwhile after summer.
Huh?
Probably after summer, it wouldn't be a bad. Okay, we are
Yeah, yeah. We'll work. She needs some too.
So then on the next issue, sounds right.
So it might be some. She would. She'll be good.
Were you wanting to?
And they stick around.
Survey
Out there.
or-
I think if you would like, just order wise, I can talk about the survey.
Well, he needs to come up, do the law.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
I'll
have
have
to
to
talk
do
about So I can talk about that first. Yeah, I'll just, I mean, you guys have, there were a few more that came in. But you guys saw pretty much the questions that I asked. So there's just. I say.
Now maybe you're okay.
We don't all think it's, we're just gonna try.
If you hear a ding or anything, it doesn't look like he's tried to join yet, but I think we'll just start.
Well, our chairman.
Just, I don't know if there's anybody else coming, but last call for public testimony, and I have Mark and Ashley Nelson submitted something to me, but anybody else?
All right, well, I will call the meeting to order and first we'll stand for the. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ken Hart, our board chair, is not able to be here tonight, so I'm going to be filling in for him. Special meeting that we have to talk about the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services. And you guys should all have a draft there you've been able to review. So welcome everybody that is here tonight. And we do have a section for public comment. First, Sean is going to just kind of present maybe a little bit about the survey that we had and some of the comments we had coming on that, and then we'll open it up for the public comment.
Okay, I will get started here. So it's been shared with the board too, but just kind of overall, the survey was a fairly short survey. The summary, the first question had parents, so with this survey, it only went out to parents that had a child registered in our school right now. So there's the potential that some new incoming parents, or if the child was not enrolled last year, that they wouldn't have got the survey. But so that went out to parents. We have a little over 60 responses. That could be from each parent, but they did, we required them to put in an email so that just to limit, so that we knew it wasn't multiple responses coming from one person. First question was, on a scale of 1 to 5, how concerned are you about the potential health threat of COVID-19 to your child? So that's the difference there is your child. 47% rated a 1. That would be low concern, at the farthest end of low. 26% said a 2, 16% a 3. So that is a large majority, nearly 90% rated as a 1, 2, or 3. The remaining 11%, 10% of those were 4, and then 1% 5. The next question that our parents answered is on a scale of 1 to 5, how concerned are you about the potential health threat of COVID-19 to yourself? So talking about the parent as the adult there. Very similar results, actually identical for the number of ones. That was about 50%, not quite a majority, but very large plurality gave it a 1. Another actually even more concerned for the kids than the parents. So about 36% rated it a 2, and another 13% rated it a 3, leaving just 4% at a 4, and no parents marked 5. The third question was on a scale of 1 to 5, how concerned are you about the potential health threat of COVID-19 to your community? This one was a little bit more shifted to the concerned range, but 27% rated it a 1, 31% rated it a 2. So that's again a sizable majority in the 1s and 2s. That would still be 58%. Another 23% gave it a 3. And approximately 20% gave it a 4 or a 5. 11 and 7 is what it ended up. So that was actually probably the highest level of potential threat that was listed on that survey. The next question said, please select COVID-19 interventions that you would be supportive of at the current level of spread in our community. So that where we're at right now, or I guess technically things change fast, but where we were at about 4 days ago. There were a list of interventions. It probably wasn't exhaustive, but I think there were lots of options to choose from. The largest by far was increased hand washing and sanitation, with 87% of surveyors responding that way. Quarantining, requiring students to stay home when sick, etc., was at a 61%. Enhanced social distancing was at 13%. Keeping classroom windows open was at 56%. Requiring indoor masking, which is a topic that comes up a lot of these type of meetings, was at 16%. So I would say that would be requiring indoor masking when you cannot distance, which was similar to our protocol pre-April last year. So 16% were in support of that. Requiring indoor masking at all times, there were 6%. Encouraging vaccination was at 20%. Requiring that students who are sick stay home. So that's like that have COVID symptoms and have not tested negative, stay home for an extended period of time. That was at 45% support. And then a few other individual comments. There was 17% of the parents responded, I'm not supportive of any additional interventions. So the second question was if the spread of COVID-19 rose to high levels. And again, high is not defined. There's a CDC definition I'll get into a little when we talk about the plan. But and then there was also a question later on in the survey that asked what they considered to be high, but the question didn't define it. It said high levels of spread in our community. And for the most part, it was very identical to current level of spread. A few small differences I saw. Really, it surprised me actually less people were in support of increased hand washing, and so that was a drop of about 4%. There was a slight uptick requiring indoor masking when social distancing isn't possible. Like I said, was at 17% or 16%. It went up to 34%. And requiring indoor masking at all times went from 7% to 16%. But other than that, I mean, I think it basically followed the same, well, maybe slightly increased overall. The next question was an open-ended question about terms of positive cases in our school, community, region, or state. What do you consider to be a high level of spread? This one for me, I mean, I don't want to go through and read the individual answers, but to me, reading through the individual answers, and you guys saw them too, but it became quickly apparent to me how different a page people are on. And it's probably been a year and a half or 2 years of being on a different page, but it really is coming to a head. There were responses that varied from a case a single case in the school or case in town to, 50 severe cases or 500 people in our town, which is the population of our town. So 20% spread in this county, or 20% of people having it at a current time. 10% of students and staff. So it just, I guess if anything, if there's anything to glean from that, there certainly is disagreement about what constitutes high spread when it comes to COVID-19 in our community. The next question was, would you be supportive of different quarantine rules for students and staff who have provided records about being vaccinated, previously infected, or having antibodies? So that was a question, would it make sense to the parents if we treated those two populations differently? This would be both students and staff. That was a resounding no from the community. 80% of the community was not in favor of that. And that also came out in the comments as well, fairly strongly. And 20% said they would be in favor of that. Just to be accurate for the CDC guidance, it does have differing guidance. And also our public health district has differing guidance for if someone is quarantined or is vaccinated or not. They don't, that guidance doesn't get into previously infected or presence of antibodies, which was a little bit maybe more nuanced in this, but so there's that. The second survey was, would you be supportive of the school working with local hospitals and doctors to host a COVID vaccination clinic to offer vaccinations for unvaccinated students of approved age with parental permission, staff, and community members? And that, I guess I would say, wasn't quite as resounding, but certainly a significant majority of 60% said they would not be supportive of the school working with local hospitals and doctors to do that. 40% were. And then the last piece was the comments, and I guess it was like the other comments before, is that it varies very widely in how people feel about it and what they consider to be a serious threat or not. I guess the last thing I would say about that is this stuff that we do, that you guys ultimately do, because I guess I'm the boss in the school, but ultimately it's your guys' decision how you want it to be operated. It's tough stuff. And one of actually several comments that came in, I would say on both ends of the spectrum, had a tendency to say, it's really easy. X. It's really easy. Everybody just needs to be vaccinated. And it can be required. It's really easy. It's just like a cold or a flu. I would say it's not really easy what you guys are doing. It's really hard. And that's why we're having a special board meeting on August 19th, a year and a half into the pandemic. It's tough. And they're big decisions. I want to keep kids safe. I want to keep things normal. I think there's balances all of the time as we start to talk about the plan. I know what doctors, even large majority of doctors, plurality, however you want to say. I know what health professionals say. They have a certain point of view, and they're trying to protect people in their job. This board is a governing body that also has a job, and that job is to keep kids in school, to keep kids healthy. That's in law. As far as what you guys are doing, and it's not easy, but we have to balance. There's a lot of balance that has to go on. We have to decide, what are appropriate risks so that we can maintain normal development for kids, and what are things that are not ultimately appropriate risks that we want to take in the midst of a pandemic. So not easy, and everybody's an expert, or at least we all think we are, including me. So that is the results of the survey. And then I thought, if you're okay with it, just because in case I think it would help with any public comment if I kind of go through this first, just verbally. And then that way, if there was any comment that came up because of something that was said in here, or a clarification that I provide, then they could add it in.
Yeah.
Comment.
And you went through it at the last board meeting, so maybe.
Okay, fairly quick
In a
with
bridge.
the main edits or changes.
So I'd say even at that, we're still may modify it tonight.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, I need it's on the action agenda, so it's my hope and expectation that the board will approve a plan. That's the important thing. We're required in order to access the federal COVID money, ESSER 3, to have a plan on file that is reviewed every 6 months by the board. So that's the big goal, is to have that. The draft that I have, Glenn, is certainly open to any edit that the board would like to make. Please don't say delete the whole thing. And start
Can we
over.
go plan B, wing it?
See you tomorrow. Yeah. I don't think so. It has to meet a few requirements with the state, and I can answer those if needed, but that's the goal. So we did cover it. Just a couple of things. I'll try and hit the main changes. I met with Carol. I've actually met with Carol a couple times since our last board meeting to talk about a few things. In the definition section previously, I had what the CDC considers to be high and substantial spread in both broken down by Lewis County and Nez Perce. Part of that is to help us understand that what the CDC does is working for the whole country. And they're not necessarily building a plan on a county of the size of Lewis County with a population of 3,300 people, or a town of Nez Perce with the low density that we have of 500. They're building a plan for Los Angeles, New York, and Washington, D.C. And so the levels that the CDC has defined would be extremely low levels of cases. The next part in that definitions is new and added. And that would be the school definitions. I don't know for sure about these numbers. And ultimately, I think this would be a good place for the board to consider how you would feel about these. But again, it gives a substantial and high level of spread. My thinking is this. I think we have a lot of families here that are multi-kid families. So it would be pretty easy to get to a place. I mean, if my family came down, I've got all 6 kids enrolled in school this year. So if my family all caught COVID a second time, I guess, that would be 6 cases right like that. That may not, and Quinn brought it up at the last board meeting, that might not constitute massive spread in our school. That's where the 10, is it an arbitrary number? It's an arbitrary number. It was something I was thinking as a superintendent, like, boy, it gets to 10 cases in the school, a few families involved. We've got pretty high level of this stuff going around. The other one is a substantial spread. I've had a few people call and ask me about why is it 0? It's not actually 0, it says more than 0. So all that means to me is, look, if we've got cases of COVID that are happening inside this building, my personal belief is that's substantial, that's meaningful, that's something that we should be paying attention to pretty actively. So that's that piece. On the next piece, I took out some of the underlining things and bolding things. I have a tendency to do that in my writing anyways, but masks are not required by the Nez Perce School District at the beginning of the year. As far as I know, the only school district in our region that are requiring masks at this point, well, there's 2 now. Moscow has decided to do that. They've set a 3-week window and they're going to review where cases stand. And Lapway has now done the exact same thing. They've put a 3-week window. There's some charter schools in Moscow too. But masks will not be required. The rest of that is just guidance from the CDC about how masks should be worn. It's interesting to me, just for knowledge sake, our CDC in America defines or says that the current CDC recommendation is that everyone in a school right now, vaccinated or not, should be wearing masks at all times indoors. That's the current CDC recommendation. It's interesting to me that the WHO, the World Health Organization, which sometimes get beat up more than the CDC, and most European countries, I'd say a majority of European countries, do not require masking for kids from 0 to 12. That's just their standard. So that's another organizing body around health. Of course, it's a worldwide one, not a United States one, that has a slightly different recommendation. They say that children 0 to 12 should not be wearing masks. It does allow for the school board to require masks at some point if the following things are met. The level of spread in Lewis County and Nez Perce is high, that probably at this point in the pandemic at least for the next few weeks, is there. And action is supported by the public health district due to, and that lists a few things. A high school level, regional spread, high hospitalization or death rates, and then other pretty vague other reasons approved by the board. So masks are not required at this point, but it gives the board the power to reinstate that if it met those criteria. Outdoor, no mask required. We do list off the CDC recommendation that people who are not fully vaccinated wear masks. Then a little bit of information about mask recommendations and wearing. Modifying facilities has to do with cohorting. Again, it does not require cohorting or physical distancing, but leaves both as potential tools in the case of high levels of spread. Notification to parents, notification of positive test and exposure. This is a bit of a change for us. Last year, what happened with our local public health district is that they said if we were wearing masks when close, when social distancing wasn't possible, and in those kind of group settings, like in the hallways or other places like that, that we were not required to, that they wouldn't recommend quarantining everybody who's been exposed. Obviously, that had to do with mask wearing, and we're not wearing masks anymore. So the public health district would recommend that everybody who is exposed would quarantine. That's their recommendation. I have a feeling as a superintendent that if we were to have that bar, it wouldn't take very long to not have any kids in the school, given the current level of spread. It really wouldn't take very long at all if everybody had to stay home for 14 days. So I don't find that to be a reasonable way to kind of find some balance. I also don't think that masks at this point with our community are a really palpable tool. And so to kind of prevent some of that quarantine. And so I was struggling a little bit with my recommendation about, well, how do we balance some of that? How do we keep it from kind of becoming rampant spread? So basically with a positive test or exposure, we will defer to parental decision making. I do think it's going to add a level of effort and stress on our staff a little bit, but parents will be able to elect. So we will send a letter home that will say, we believe that your student was exposed. We don't name who the positive is. We don't even say if they're in the same grade, although parents might be able to figure that out in our small school. We believe your child's been exposed. We believe it's been at this distance approximately, and we believe it's been for this amount of time. So that letter will have information about that they've been exposed, a proximity, and then duration would be the other thing. At that point, parents would have an option. We will allow them to quarantine is the right word. We will allow them to quarantine their child at home for the recommended amount of time. Our teachers will provide online education to the children that decide to the families and the students who decide to stay at home, while simultaneously providing in-person instruction to the families and students who elect to continue in the school. That gives some balance and hands, I think, that power back to parents a little bit to make their decision with where they're at. The only other thing that is in there, and I don't know if it's there in a later piece, but it's related, so I'm just going to talk about it, is that a student who is listed as a significant exposure, that is meeting the CDC guidance of, or public health guidance, I would say, of, more than 15 minutes at a close proximity. Those students, if they develop symptoms during that time, so they can keep coming to school. If they develop symptoms at that time, then we would treat that as a school system as a positive test. We just kind of would assume, rather than letting it, and this is my recommendation, rather than letting it fester in one case becoming another case and another case, we would say, look, if you had a significant exposure and now we're 4 days in and you're generating symptoms, we're going to treat that like a positive too. Will that be perfect in stopping the spread of this? Probably not, because you're waiting until symptoms develop. But it seems to me, and my recommendation, to be kind of a reasonable compromise. Parents would have the option of going and getting their child tested if they so, they say, no, it's not COVID, it's really allergies. You go get your child tested, and if they test negative, pop them right back to the school. Hand washing and health etiquette, cleaning and maintaining healthy facilities, transportation, no masks required. Recommended that they sit with family members, but not required. Contact tracing, it says that we'll continue to work with the public health district to do that. Diagnostic screening and screening testing. Really, early on in the pandemic, even the CDC came out and said, look, we don't really think like this lining kids up in a line outside the door and screening them helps. I guess our plan never changed, and we kept doing that. Overall, when I looked at it, I don't think it really never sent anyone home that we didn't catch anyone. And so I think that's just extra work without much of a benefit. We will still provide some screening if a kid comes to the office and says, I'm coughing and I have a fever and a sinus headache, and we'll run a fever test or whatever, get their temperature, but no like pre-screening to get into the building. Vaccinations, I said at the last board meeting how I feel about vaccinations, but certainly school districts have been doing vaccinations for a long time. We've had requirements in the state of Idaho for 100 years as far as at some level of vaccination information. Parents in Idaho for all of those years, as far as I know, have been able to opt their child out for 3 reasons. There's a medical exemption, which requires a doctor's note. There's a religious exemption. And then there's, in the state of Idaho, there's, I don't need to share that information exemption. You can literally write it on, you went to our ed law training a couple of years ago, you can write it on the back of a receipt. And that counts as an official document in a reason not to have vaccination records. But that hasn't stopped schools and the State Department of Education from keeping track of vaccinations. Our policy, with obviously written long before COVID-19, the board has the right, because of in law, the health of students has the right to if there was a measles outbreak in school, students who do not have a measles vaccine or have not provided evidence of having a measles vaccine can be kept from attending school in the midst of an outbreak. I don't think anybody's proposing that at this point. I'm not proposing that for COVID-19. Certainly the vaccine right now is only available for students that are older than 12 or 12 or older, and is still under emergency authorization. But I think just for me to kind of say it publicly that, schools have been in the business of vaccinations for a long time, and we've kind of had that. So that's that piece. As far as vaccines, let's see. Another page here. I still have the part about promoting vaccinations. And so mostly that's just a statement. And then there's the piece about it's strongly recommended that students age 12 plus receive the COVID vaccine, and unvaccinated students are exposed. I should probably edit that after those other changes, now that I see that again. To students who are exposed or become infected may be required in this practices. Then there's a line in there about accommodations and disabilities, absenteeism and attendance. I already talked about that and how that protocol would work. Like I said, basically, once you're kind of on that list of high exposure, if you came down with symptoms, we'd treat it like a positive. The other check boxes at the end, how are the LEA addressing plans? Those are state required boxes. I wouldn't focus on them too much, quite honestly. And that was the big change with quarantine, as you can see, based on the feedback. My recommendation would be to not have any difference in quarantine or isolation for students that have a vaccine or staff that has a vaccine or not. One thing to recognize with quarantine right now, and this would take some other type of board action, and we'd have to figure out where money comes from, but if staff members, it was federal law for a while that if a staff member had to be quarantined because of COVID, we had paid, and they didn't take sick leave. In January, that ended. We continued that because we had a MOA, a memorandum of understanding with the association, that we would continue that. We continued that through the end of the school year, and that MOA expired and wasn't renegotiated. And the law expired and nothing else got reauthorized. So at this point, if a staff member is required to quarantine, the only thing that would require them to quarantine would be a positive test. If that's the case, then they will have to take it out of their sick days. If they're out of sick days or choose not to do that, it would have to be out of personal days. And if they're out of those, it would have to be, they take a pay cut, basically. They could also, staff would have the same opportunity. If a kid, although they would be using their days, if a kid in their class tested positive, they would have the option of teaching from home for the 10 days of required quarantine. If they elected to do that, they would have to take their leave to do so. They would have to take, starting with their sick leave. That is the plan as presented here. And then I think, so before the board discusses it, then I think it would be a good time to move to public.
Okay.
I have Ashley Nelson, who submitted something to me, cannot make it, so I told her that I would read it.
You have it.
Do you want me to go over some of these procedures?
I
first, or
think,
do you think we're good since we just. have
I think
a
we're
couple?
good. We got Mark. He's done it before. He's a
Yeah.
veteran.
Okay.
We were gonna try and keep it 3 minutes, but. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to read Ashley's
I don't
first?
think it's bad, just to remind people.
Yep.
We have it.
Okay, well, I mean, there just are a few
Yeah,
things I
just
know
a-
that are late.
Yeah.
We don't always have such a group and people wanting to make comments, so just to kind of remind everyone that if you want to do public comments, that you request that in advance. But meetings of Nez Perce School District are open to the public. However, the legal right to be present at such meetings does not include a legal right to speak or participate in such public meetings. During select meetings of the board, the agenda includes a public input opportunity for the board to receive direct input from individuals in attendance at such meetings. And as Sean said, whoever wanted to speak has already requested that. So, and then each speaker shall be allowed a maximum of 3 minutes to address the board. Speakers shall speak directly to the issue as briefly and fully as possible. Persons seeking to have the board take action upon a specific matter shall be specific to the board regarding what action they desire to have taken. And the board has no obligation to answer questions raised during public input. The board shall refer all questions to the superintendent for a response. And presentations are to be civil and respectful, and I have no doubt that they will be. So again, just before Sean reads Ashley's, again, just want to thank everyone for participating in the survey and providing their comments. It does help us understand where everyone's coming from, and you guys for being here, and whoever's watching online. So
And so the other thing, just so everybody understands, when the parents filled out that form, those comments were shared with you guys. They won't be read out loud publicly, but those comments, yes, I think it was the second email that had just the
Right.
comments in
Mhm.
it. So,
Yeah.
so those have been, just in case anyone's listening online, those, and you made comments, those have been reviewed by the board. I will read Ashley's and then I'll let Mark go. So this is a letter from Ashley Nelson. She's a constituent in Zone 1, I think. As most of you know, my youngest son, Forrest Nelson, was diagnosed with cancer in the fall of 2019. It was terrifying for not just my family, but for the rest of the school and community. Not only did he have to endure 4 rounds of IV chemotherapy with week-long hospital stays and 15 spinal taps, but he also had to be away from his home, school, friends, and pets for 5 months. All of our prayers were answered in March 2020 when he was pronounced cured from his cancer and able to return home to all that he loved, or so we thought. We were thrust into the next life hurdle, a worldwide pandemic. Forrest was not able to return to school as he had hoped. Along with the rest of the students in Nez Perce, he continued with online school. He didn't complain. He didn't see friends all summer. He looked forward to starting school in the fall, hopeful that for some childhood normalcy. He was nervous about starting, though, after months of seeing that the majority of our town did not take the health and safety of others, including him, seriously. Everyone seemed more concerned about their own wants, needs, and comforts, or as some would call it, freedoms. So as the 2021 school year began, Forrest started in-person school, even though he was nervous. Unfortunately, when local cases started spiking in October, he returned to online school. No more friends, no sports, no hope that our community would work together for the greater good for everyone. Just their own wants and needs. Forrest was finally able to get fully vaccinated in the summer. We all breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that he now had some protection against the virus. He is very much looking forward to 7th grade and everything that comes with it. We have been hopeful that this school year would be without COVID-19. This is not the reality. It's back. I know that our school will do whatever it takes to keep not just my child safe, but all of our children and faculty. Most people might not think that COVID is a big deal, but to some it is. And I would hope that our amazing community would be able to work together for the greater good of all its members, not just the healthy ones and not just themselves. Education is the greatest freedom that America has given to all of us. I believe we can all work together to keep each other healthy and safe. Then everyone can and will have that freedom. If we don't, then we won't have healthy teachers, coaches, students, and community members. Please take this pandemic seriously. Do your part. Get vaccinated and wear a mask, if not for yourself, then for your neighbor, the immunocompromised, the people who don't know any better, or the little boy that beat cancer and just wants to be in school. Maybe masks and vaccines don't work 100%, but it would be nice to see some cohesive effort to keep all our kids in school. I'm tired of the whining and complaining. We all want the same thing, kids in school. A little effort goes a long way. Ashley Nelson, that's her testimony. Okay.
Thank you, Ashley. And Mark?
So my name's Mark. I just represent myself here. My comments pertain to the vaccination clinic. That's really it. And I have 4 main considerations for you. I think the clinic could be argued that that's outside of the scope of what schools should be doing. Schools obviously do a lot more than just teach math, science, history, but I think a clinic is a stretch, especially considering the dynamics of the COVID issue. Furthermore, there's other options in this community. As Sean stated in the survey, it's not just about the students. The way he read it was it would be for the community members, the staff, and other families. So it could be done down at the emergency services building. The city could do something, and oh, by the way, there's a clinic down the road, and that's actually what they do. So that's actually a very good option for a vaccination clinic. Second point, the nature of this vaccination, I think at least, we go to church with some anti-vaxxers. That's a hill they die on, and we respect that. We're not that way, but I think this is a little bit different just because there's not longitudinal studies. And so the nature of this conversation is different than I think vaccines for other things that have been around for a long time. I don't think it's a moral issue, so I don't think the school would be getting into morality, but some people might perceive it to be a moral decision. It's definitely a risk assessment decision, and I think getting a vaccine is best. The conversation is best had at home with parents and the kids. I know the school will have a message. I know that that's what the government does, but I think to get a vaccine, that final decision or the decision to go do it should be between the parent and the child in their own space. The science, it is inconsistent. There's research that indicates it works. There's research to indicate it doesn't work. I now work at St. Mary's Health. Believe it or not, there's a lot of debate there too. There's definitely a message from the institution and the organization, but at the ground level, there's a lot of chatter. And so I don't think the message is consistent as from practitioners as we may think it is. There's definitely inconsistency. I hear people defending vaccinations and other protocol, but then in the break room, they're not observing what they're saying. So there's definitely inconsistency. Third point, the effects of actually having a clinic here. The perception, I guess that gets back to the previous point. I think the perception might be you're getting into business you shouldn't be getting into. I think it could put your professional reputation at risk. I know leaders put themselves at risk all the time. So it may be something you assume that risk and you're happy to do it. And I don't fault you if those are your convictions. but it's just a consideration for you. And I think over the years, we pay taxes, but we just put out $3K to buy homeschool curriculum, and I'm happy to pay taxes. But I think over the years, it's going to be more challenging for schools to get levies to pass. And so that's just another consideration. At the end of the day, people have the choice now to get vaccinated or not and where to do it. The choice is there. And so I would just recommend to you all that you just don't get into the business of having a clinic here for this round. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess that was everything for public comment. So now we have the action item to discuss this as a board and come up with something. that-
Hopefully approve something
Yeah.
with edits, if edits are needed. Happy to answer any questions. To address kind of Mark's comment, I don't, especially after, maybe my personal opinion was different at the last board meeting. I certainly think that schools, public schools especially, are best and most highly functional when we are ultimately a reflection of the community that we serve. That doesn't mean that every single decision has to go out for a straw poll to see what 51% people think, but it certainly, you don't want to fight that. Schools are best when they're represented. I don't have any intention as superintendent, nor is it in this plan, to offer a vaccination clinic at the school.
Support that. I mean, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
he's right, we have a clinic. I mean,
Yeah.
if the community wants to have a vaccination day, great, that would probably be a better place for it than the school.
Anything else with plan? What's the discussion? I highlighted that at least that the starting point might be the school definitions of what we consider to be higher.
Question for you on page 7, Sean.
Yeah.
You got positive test with symptoms, you isolate for 10 days. Positive test, no symptoms, you only isolate for 7.
Yeah, so I'm gonna actually pull this up and I hope people kind of can see I brought this. So I explain that a little, maybe it could be worded differently, but I think it's right here. So this is what Carol sent me as far as their recommendation. And you can see here, there's the unvaccinated and then the vaccinated. That's what the public health district is doing. So this is the piece though. So close contact or exposure, unvaccinated, which at this point, basically, if there's no tiered system for somebody who's vaccinated or unvaccinated, everybody's just unvaccinated would fall into that category. So an asymptomatic close contact or exposure, that's where they have the May test on or after 5th day, and they may return on day 7. And of course, the public health district recommends that they wear a mask during that time. So that's where that recommendation goes off of. So an exposure, it says positive test with no symptoms. So that probably needs to be adjusted. That's a good catch. I had that wrong. I think when I edited those two things together, I've looked at this thing 100 times, but
It's a positive test would just be.
a positive
10
test.
With or
10
without
days.
symptoms should be.
Yeah,
10.
10
A positive test would be 10 days, isolate, it's with or without symptoms. The way it works with a positive test is that if you have symptoms, that timer starts the second your symptoms started. So you actually go backwards, right? Like symptoms 2 days ago, you get tested. Your 10 days started 2 days ago. With a test with no symptoms, your timer starts as soon as you got the positive. Or took the test, I guess. I need to fix that. So that, under your recommendation, would just fall to isolate for 10 days from positive test. I apologize.
And on that same note there, positive test, no symptoms, you can come back after 5. If you get a negative test, then it's because you don't know when you started your symptoms. I was wondering why that 5 wasn't up above, but that's because you don't know.
So where that actually, so the mistake that I made is the difference in recommendation for what they say for a vaccinated individual. So basically a vaccinated individual after a short little period of time, if they test positive, the CDC and the public health district both say that as soon as that person gets a negative test, if they're vaccinated, as soon as that person gets a negative test, they're clear, they could return. So that's where that originally came from.
Either way, you get a negative test. You have.
Right.
So on the whole line of tests, you did say that the school has tests.
There are tests here, yes.
So is it recommended that they use those ones or that they do just go off and get tested?
It would not matter. We have approximately 40 tests. We could run through them really quick. We did use a single one and we had them as of like December last year. We can provide them. We don't administer the test. So what I can do is I can hand, they're in this little sealed up packet. If a parent wants it, I can hand it to them. It's a kind of a spit test. It gets mailed off to Temple University overnight, FedEx, and then they test it the next day and they email the parent results. They actually don't email the school any results. It'll be up to the parents to share that.
But possibly could be a fairly fast turnaround on that.
Probably 48 hours, what it would be maybe expected, or at least that's what they told us. I don't know with increasing cases right now, that could affect turnaround. Well, that's called the vault test. I think we have more access to that. They also mentioned, Carol mentioned to me, Carol Warley from Public Health, that the Lewiston area, Nez Perce County, is kind of a testing desert right now, actually. St. Joe's kind of got out of the testing business, and Valley Medical Center isn't doing tests anymore either.
Yeah, I will say, so Tanner, my son, and his girlfriend, they had been sick last weekend and they wanted to come up and visit. And so they were gonna get COVID tested to make, they've had COVID and they've been vaccinated, but they were still gonna get tested. So they went to Orfino. They have a tent out there doing rapid testing. So, but they live in Clarkston and they had to
That
go
was as
clear
close
to
as they-
Orfino.
And I think
Yeah.
Jackie said Rite Aid wasn't. So I'm pretty sure the only place you can get tested now in the LC Valley is Walgreens, but maybe there's something else. Maybe the Chaz Clinic has it too.
Yeah.
And that, but she did say these, St. Mary's and Clearwater Health and Syringa are all still testing. So up here on the prairie, we actually have more access to
Yeah.
potential testing like that.
So I think if it's spreading more rapidly, there should be more people doing rapid tests.
Yeah. I do think as we look at the general arc of this, like any spread of a virus, there's gonna be these ups and downs. Vaccine's gonna have some impact. People obviously catching it and developing immunity for some amount of time, still kind of unknown, is gonna have some impact on it. So that, and they just follow these natural curves, even small little changes in behavior, like you decide to go pick up something through the drive-thru instead of going to a restaurant, or they can all of a sudden big peak and crest. We've seen it in other countries. The United Kingdom would be a great example. They reopened schools. They didn't lock down. They had their little fourth wave crest, and it's kind of fallen back down to a maybe mid to low level plateau. And I mean, for whatever reason, the deaths have not been as high there. Israel's another one that I watch where there's these crests. This won't last forever. This increase in cases. We're on the steep part of the exponential curve right now. How long that'll last in America and specifically in Idaho, who knows? Will there be another one after this? It'll get loud for a while. It'll get very busy, I think, and then it'll come back down. How high? I'm not an epidemiologist, and so far they haven't exactly proven to be able to. Who's the guy? There was a guy today that made a joke about, why God created economists, because to make the weatherman look good. So I actually thought that joke would be, why did God create epidemiologists or statistical modelers to make the weatherman look good? But it is what it is.
So Sean, on, I guess it'd be page 2, I think, where we have the school definitions and we have that 0. Is that what you're thinking? Is that school definitions? I mean, it says locally. So is that locally town or locally in the building?
The school definition would be in our, I just put locally, the locally part just means that's not a CD. I'm kind of creating clear separation from the CDC definition. This is just, I could say board determined high level of spread. And so that's what I mean. by
In the
locally. It
school
would,
system or in our school district?
I would call it in our school district. So a parent testing positive would not fit in this. This would be a staff member or a student.
Someone who has direct contact
Yep.
with the school.
Oh, but not a parent.
I would not count a student in that definition. Or a parent in that definition, excuse me. Unless that parent worked.
Does you know who has you COVID, or do they just, the health district say you have a case in your school?
It varies. When spread was really high, it was pretty slow, but they can identify them. So most of the
Do they
time-
let you know who?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, and they do. Last year we had a pretty low level of overall spread. We had one case in the elementary that was actually never had a school exposure at all. And then we had the 5 in the high school that all came at the exact same time. Yep. That was it. That was actually the entire amount of spread.
I would think they're on our school definitions, the 10 active cases for high is good.
Mhm.
On the substantial spread, I would put like 2 households. So that it's actually
Like you
spreading. I mean,
said.
one family goes somewhere, funeral, vacation, they come back, they're sick. There's no spread to us. Or to any of the kids.
But it would move us into substantial.
Yeah. That's where I think that probably should say, if you get that data to know that,
Yeah.
2 separate households have it, well then, yes, we have a spread actually happening.
I'm not opposed to that. I mean, like I said, those were just kind of arbitrarily put in by me thinking what would be. I can see the point, especially it's hard, it's not perfect to determine, where did that spread come from. I think there's a difference, obviously, between a family that went on vacation and they notify me that they got sick and then they quarantine, and then maybe the family went on vacation and then had kids in school for 5 days and then the symptoms come. But that's hard to like tease out in a plan what that means. And ultimately with substantial, none of this plan has like when A hits, B has to happen. It's all pretty flexible. It just gives us some guidelines of like, okay, this is pretty substantial. Maybe we should be looking at some other things or at least having those conversations. They're
I
tough
don't even know if It
conversations.
should just be even more vague than that. I mean, because you don't know what the circumstance is gonna be. So I mean, like, to be determined by the
Yeah.
board at the time.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, because we don't know what it's gonna look like.
Yeah.
If and when it happens.
It's balancing it. I mean, from the survey, whether it came to masks or even like requiring distancing of students or cohorting of students, there really wasn't much difference in how the community felt about, those protocols, whether it was considered high or low spread or current spread, I guess. Is what I would say. It is, I mean, everything's balanced, right? Like, it's growing right now. We're not wearing masks, which, there's Ken. I don't know if he just got in, but I just noticed it. Probably if he's asleep. I hope that wasn't for too long. I didn't.
I didn't hear you. We were not there for very long.
Ken, are you on there? No. Let's see. We are at a point of extremely high and growing spread overall in our community. I mean, a week ago, St. Mary's Health System came out with something about being near capacity and stretching. Today, Kootenai Health up north, they kind of laid out how quickly their cases in the ICU and in the hospital have grown, like, 2.5 times faster than the last peak. Very, very rapid. And they even made
Spokane
it,
is their fault.
yeah, and
They're acting
Spokane
that
is
you
full.
can't, like, somebody had heart attack.
Yes.
You
yeah.
can't go there.
Yeah, received
I
a
know.
text from a nurse, man, like, this would be a really bad time to have a car wreck or a heart attack because there is nowhere for you. It's growing and we haven't seen that curve taper off. There's no direct evidence that I've seen that Delta is any more deadly or harmful to children. But the more people that catch it, I mean, even if the percentage of people that end up in the hospital remains the same, the more people who catch it, the more it'll be. This virus is certainly around and will spread. I mean, this is no longer, stay in your home for 15 days and hopefully the virus goes away. It's here and it has ultimately is in the process of transitioning from being pandemic to endemic, like all the other viruses that human bodies deal with. This one just happens to be definitively, provably more deadly and more risky than others, particularly to certain age groups, but also, to a lot of different age groups, not just some. It is true statement that for the age groups that we're dealing with most of our population in these buildings, it probably an approximate risk of the flu for them. Populations, not our staff and the rest of the community, it is substantially higher risk than so. Just want that, I guess, to be said. So have to balance all of those things. I worry without masks or other interventions that we could see high spread. And it kind of feels, there's part of me that says, well, why right now are we struggling? And if we're looking at operating a public school system, there's an argument for me to say, when the curve's like this on COVID spread right now, like what's the point? You don't walk outside, right, when the hurricane's at its strongest force. It's a lot easier to walk out 15 minutes after it's passed. And so why do all these kind of things to try and fight and stop a spread that is just it's gonna flow. That river's flowing. And there's part of it says maybe the smartest thing is to say, probably not 2 weeks given the way the ramp is, but a month, and it would be a whole lot. Maybe we're walking outside after the hurricanes pass by, but that's hard to tell too. I can't predict what a month from now is going to look like. My guess is, what I do know is it can't go up forever. That's impossible.
I'm still on the definition.
Yeah.
Is that what we're saying?
Whatever you guys, I got way off.
Well, actually, like I said, I know the two household I like, but then you guys make the point about, did the family come back from somewhere and they were here for 5 days? And I don't know, there's really no difference in here, is there, between substantial and high level, what we're doing?
I mean, I think it's just some terminology for us to be able to share and talk about, like.
Yeah, I think to have something that's more than 0, once Sean sees that, then if he thinks the board needs to get together and talk or something, he's at least got something. to
Like,
go
look,
on.
it kind of meets our definition
Yeah.
of substantial.
So based on that, I'm fine with that definition that we have it.
The only place where that would come in, I guess, that use of that words is, remember at the beginning when we're talking about masks and social distancing, that, a few criteria kind of have to be able to met to consider those things. So in there it says, if it's obviously the town and the region is high spread, and then you would also have to show that there's spread happening in the school. Or there's a couple other things like, there is that piece with the hospitals that are saying like, oh, we can't. And the hospital, it's a tricky thing. They're a building, right? They are expanding and they've done it before. They do it all the time. They have plans for it. But the scary part is you don't know how much air can you put in the balloon before it pops. And who knows what it looks like when it pops. The other thing that I saw was like, we better hope there's no disruption to the oxygen supply chain. Because our hospital is on a day-to-day delivery at this point. There's no backlog. So if there was a disruption to the oxygen supply chain, we're in a lot of trouble. So. Are we okay with the 0 stuff?
Or
I still think it should be more than 0, because the spread needs to have to be a minimum of 2, because if only one has it, it hasn't spread.
So more than one?
Yeah.
More than one? Okay.
more than one.
I can make that edit. And I will fix just to be clear on the positive test with no symptoms will be isolate for 10 days from positive test.
You have throughout here, Sean, different places where you have not fully vaccinated, not been, yeah.
The one that I mentioned is the Or was that?
Well, there's more, actually, just on page 3, there's 3 of them on that page. It says not fully vaccinated.
So, and that would be up to you guys. All that is, like the outdoors one where it says not fully vaccinated, that is just the CDC recommendation. I guess if the board would prefer me to, I could strip that language. It doesn't carry any weight. It doesn't require anything. It just says that's what the CDC
Yeah, no, like I
says.
said, I think it's just a language deal to keep it clarified, consistent.
Yeah. Do we want it out?
Just to make it consistent.
Make it consistent, you know, we're not delineating between vaccinated and not vaccinated.
Okay.
Like I said, throughout here, there's, I only one several of them where it talks about not being vaccinated. Other than just being phrased that way, it doesn't mean anything.
So just so I'm clear with the edit, and we would just say like on that, the CDC one, however, CDC recommends people. And I would just take out who are not fully vaccinated.
Right, that's kind of, I'm thinking that just cleans it up. Make sure people realize we're not delineating between vaccinated and non-vaccinated people.
So then would you have with the physical distancing based on CDC guidelines, remove that too?
Because
I don't-
the only other
I
piece
don't-
I'm hesitant on that, like, I guess, obviously, whatever the board wants to do. It doesn't, that's not the CDC recommendation. So I would guess, I would say, take out the sentence if that's what the board says rather, because I don't think that's a factually accurate statement to say, however, CDC recommends people to wear masks when in crowded outdoor settings. Right now, it's CDC recommends people to wear masks when not fully vaccinated in crowded outdoor settings. But either way. I do see what you're saying, and I understand that that's a point of, pushback or concern for some people, is that any creation of two different classes.
Well, like I said, I don't think you're gonna operate that way or that. It's just something I've seen reading through here. You know, where we changed some of, split away from them. Well,
Yeah.
we kind of keep referring to it though.
There was another.
Referring to it as what the CDC says, but not what we,
Like I
not what
said,
we're doing.
yeah, I mean, even where I'm seeing them, it's not, if you go and take out, right here at the bottom of this.
Oh, yeah.
Classroom for people who are not fully vaccinated to reduce transmission risk. It just needs to say,
But if it's.
maintain at least 3 feet of distance between students within the classroom to reduce transmission risk. It just needs to be deleted out. Just a language.
Mhm.
They need to take out the CDC recommends, but that's not what they recommend.
Yeah, that's my only scroll. I mean, we could just kind of get rid of the whole, any CDC recommendation. I generally do think, I know it says he's waiting to be admitted again, Marcy.
I think as long as we're clear on what we want, that it doesn't hurt to say what the CDC recommends.
They're generally, as we go to operate a school, I know lots become, political or whatever, but I don't care who the president is or something. They're in the United States, a governing, or a body, not governing, but they're a body that makes recommendations regarding public health and the spread of disease. And I guess personally, don't really have any issue with, it seems clear in these sentences that this is the CDC recommendation and it's not a district requirement or anything like that. And just to make it clear to people, I guess, what the CDC recommends. Kind of like when we still put up signs that say, masks are recommended or something like that. We're not going to put up a sign that says vaccines are recommended. I do think it was this page, and now I lost it again. Page 6, I think that needs to be edited, and it's the middle of the page. unvaccinated students who are exposed or become infected with COVID-19, I would take that unvaccinated out if that's okay with you guys. Obviously, just students who are exposed or become infected may be required to best practices. That, I guess, is another point of discussion for the board. That just even that word right there, it's strongly recommended that all student athletes, I think athletics is one of our biggest risks.
The only thing I say on that comment is just remove the word strongly and just say, we recommend.
And I don't have to bold it. I like
In
to do
red.
that. In red. Strongly recommended. I will do that.
I mean, that's what I would think too. Is it just to state what the CDC recommends, but anywhere where we're actually stating what our plan is, like on the quarantining and things like that, it doesn't say that. We haven't made that distinction, but I think if we're gonna make a statement about what the CDC is recommending, then I think put within recommend.
I would say, Sean, the paragraph right before that, about promoting vaccine. I would almost just leave just the first sentence saying vaccine is currently the leading public health prevention strategy.
Okay.
Uh,
So just leave it vaccination, not promoting vaccination.
No, it's just leave the first sentence of that whole paragraph.
Oh, just take out the rest.
Yeah, because we kind of go through and kind of list not the side effects, but it is greatly reduce the number. Where it's kind of like, to me, a late night commercial. If you took this drug and you have this, give us a call.
Willing to do whatever the board would have me to do on that. My, I guess I
I
could
get
say,
it. I
my
don't-
personal feeling about vaccination and watching the Manitoba school, I think there's certainly an argument for, we don't need to be in people's business and know whether they're vaccinated or not. Seems to me like a pretty, guess my science background says that this has been a randomized controlled trial of millions of people now at this point. It's a leading public health prevention strategy, and ultimately there's two paths out of this. You either catch it, well, three. You catch it, you get a vaccine and catch it, or you get a vaccine, because I do think it'll spread for everybody. But I'll do whatever. I believe that vaccination is a good path for us to return to normalcy soon, sooner than later. But that's, again, my opinion, and I'm not a board member.
Well, and also, as I read through that paragraph, it's, there's a lot there that is currently what I think CDC and they are saying about it, but they've also, that's been an evolving discussion from them too. They've changed constantly of what they've said, how it works. And that's what kind of why I think just the first sentence saying this is the current deal, this is the best way they think we're gonna get past it, and leave the rest of it out. So we don't have to modify it later because they changed it now.
So I don't know, is there anything else, Quinn, or
Not on that part there.
any other section for any other board members?
I have a question for you back on the notification. If a student
Yeah,
would happen to get it. I know you said they will notify close proximity and you'll have all that information. But are we just notifying the ones in the proximity? Because I want to say last year when we had those cases pop up, I kind of remember hearing some grumbling from one or two person. They had no idea there was a case in school for several weeks.
Yeah.
They probably wouldn't have changed what they did, but they kind of felt that.
Correct.
School email or posted, hey, we have one case in school.
Yeah,
I don't
it
know how much
was
we can put out. that
very
there.
tough to especially in a little school district, we don't have 500 kids in high school, so, I mean, obviously,
half the time when someone tests positive, the rest of the community knows, who it is and what they ate for breakfast and all of that. In this current plan, anybody who had what between the conversations with the health district, so we have a positive in school, I call them, talk about the kids that we think might be exposed. They tell me, well, yeah, that one's probably okay to take off the list. That list that we come up with, those parents would be notified. That would be the process.
But anyone else, say a junior gets it, you're not gonna notify the parent of a second.
Yeah, not
Not
this-
even a
not at
school
this
email
point. Now,
saying.
that could change and it couldn't be written in the plan, but I think with some, if the board wanted the direction, like, say, we get into that substantial and high levels. That might be something that we could be communicated to school wide and say, look, we've hit the board's definition of a
We've hit several cases in
substantial
school.
level of spread. So that parents can be aware of that. But at this part of the plan itself just says that those who are considered to be exposed, and basically those kids that we would have, called the parents last year and said, well, they need to stay home. Now, we would send a letter home and give them the option. I do worry a little bit, especially with these rising cases right now, about what that's going to create for, and Jackie and I have talked about it, just for that's staff. I don't know where these next couple of weeks are going to lead, but you got half your kids at home, half your kids at school. And I mean, we've done it for a year and a half in some format, but a lot of that was either they were home or all at school. This that was some hybrids because some kids are having to quarantine, or even I think when we talk about like the right of a parent, we have the parents can help their child choose about vaccines or masks, but also when it comes to being exposed to this deadly virus, parents should have some flexibility to say, well, this is how I'd like that handled within the bounds of trying. This is a system also. I mean, so we have to balance that.
In this plan, Sean, I want to say our plan last year had that you could make it, you as superintendent could make a decision for only so many days before board had to give approval. Do we have, I don't see anything in here saying.
No, for the most part, I think I'd like the board to get together. If something needs to happen, I don't.
Also, you have to make a decision to get by a few days so we get.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's that authority there, but nothing like masking or social distancing. I don't think at this point I'd make that decision without board approval.
This, I guess another thing, and I suppose hopefully later in the year, we're not worrying about it when they have to do travel trips for clubs and sports, but we do have the field trip coming up and they're gonna be gone for a
nervous
whole
about-
week. What is gonna happen?
I'm nervous about the Yellowstone trip and what we'll do. I mean, I've thought about it a lot. If we have a positive case, someone will rent a car and drive a kid home. And then if you have one positive case, chances are, I don't know. But I mean, there are little things like that, like the National Park Service just came out and said, if you're gonna be in the National Park Service buildings, you're wearing a mask. So that's where they're, if they're on this field trip, will abide by local guidelines when it comes to mask wearing. But it's a good question.
And I guess just vaccinations in general, because this is a two-part thing.
Yep.
So let's say there's kids going on field trip that are just now maybe starting to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
Like, so they wouldn't even have time to get the second one.
Right.
Is the first one even gonna mean anything?
There's meaningful protection by the science that I read. There's meaningful protection within 3 days of getting the first vaccine. So not the highest level of protection, obviously, but some level of protection. I don't know, at the last board meeting, we took a look at the number of 12 to 18-year-olds who were vaccinated in Lewis County. I think all my kids were on there, but that's it. No.
You said not
Actually,
yet. You said
I
not
think,
yet.
yeah, that's right. They are now. I haven't checked it recently, but they're, not very, 5 was what that number was. I think I could name them. And we'll do that.
One.
But, um, I mean, just like we had to last year with our plan, I mean, this is a living, breathing document. We're gonna have to look at it every time. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we just have to go with the best information we have right now.
And on that, that's a big, my biggest worry in this plan. Creating a COVID committee. And it says in the first page that we've already created it and the committee they will make the recommendations and decisions. But I don't see, because it's such a hot button issue, as you can see, like, as many people are here comments. I don't know that this should go to a committee. It should be, the committee's here as the board. We should see all relevant data.
Yeah, so that is a good point. Just, I guess I would say the COVID committee. So over the summer, I picked a few staff members, 2 staff members, an elementary parent, a secondary parent. Those are kind of the requirements by the state of Idaho, because you're supposed to have a
We're
COVID.
supposed to have a committee.
They kind of reviewed this document as I mean, I did, it's not like I assigned them to put this document together. I'll take credit for it, or blame, maybe is a better word for it. But they meet, I bounced some stuff off on, they say their opinion or view. And then, but ultimately they have no binding legal authority about it. It is this discussion that's happening right now.
Whatever the committee does comes before the board.
And I could say, you know, in this case, I didn't want to throw the committee under the bus. I wanted to put my nose out there first to be busted. But they can say, would you please reconsider masks? It's bad. And you need to talk to the board about that. And I could bring that to the board and say, hey, this is, you know, and the 6-month thing is a state requirement. Honestly, like if things are changing fast, that committee might not even get together. Or maybe I'll be like, oh, I have this crazy idea. What if we did this? The parent and teacher committee can kind of tell me like, no, we're not in support of that. Or, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Maybe take it to the board. So I don't think, they don't have any authority to change the stuff.
And that makes more sense than
Recommendation,
it's state
yeah.
requirements why we had to form one. And all that.
Yeah.
Any other notes?
The other one, but I think you pretty much answered it, was that memorandum with teachers that they gotta use their sick leave or personal leave if they get.
Yeah, that wouldn't be,
That was a question, but you pretty much defined that one out.
wouldn't be in this document, probably. We never would put it in there. That would be for separate board consideration at a meeting if you guys wanted to tackle that. And as of right now, that is the way it is, actually. It doesn't, I mean, there's nothing else written anywhere. If they're required to quarantine or elect to quarantine, it'll come out of sick leave.
But didn't you say, so if they elect to quarantine, but they can still work, they can still teach from home or no?
That's a good question. But
And especially if
At
we
this
don't
point,
have
it's
anyone to cover for that.
I mean, in the old agreement or in the old MOA that we had in law, they would get paid. Actually, they wouldn't even have to work according to the law. According to the MOA, if they worked, they would get paid. But we don't have that either. So I would say, no, we would, if they elected to quarantine, and I probably wouldn't recommend them to work for free. So if they elected to quarantine, they could potentially sit at home for 14 days, taking leave, and we would have a subcommittee.
Any other questions or clarifications?
So if there's none, I guess to kind of help with a motion, if I could summarize really quick what I have in my notes for the changes that I think mostly Quinn, but everybody discussed. So the first one is to change on page 2, locals. And then if someone makes a motion, you can just say what he said. On page 2, it would be locally determined substantial spread would be more than one active case. Then on page 6, it would take out any, I'm gonna unbold, uncapitalize, it would say it is recommended that student athletes receive COVID vaccine. That would be it. And I will take out the word unvaccinated and just say students are exposed, etc. On page 7, I have the positive test with no symptoms, we would isolate for 10 days from the positive test. And then I guess the last piece, so I think those were kind of decided on and everybody was agreeable to, at least by my look. The last piece would be if, as been proposed, you would like me to strike the language when it regards CDC recommendations about that separate vaccinated versus not vaccinated. So I don't know that that was like, I don't know that I have a unanimous or a group of people that agreed on that or not. So I guess you can make a motion with the first piece, and then Quinn, if you wanted to make a motion with your addendum.
It was, I mean, that's not a big thing. It just, to me, it was clarifying the document. All he said that it's consistent what we're saying. We're not delineating between these, even if the CDC says they are.
And so I guess with that, just to kind of make it easy for board members, what I would propose, and you guys make the motions, you don't even have to listen to me one lick. But you could present, there's the possibility that someone could make a motion with option 1, which is to do those edits that I said first. And then, or somebody could make a motion with option 1 and option 2, which would be to do the edits that I mentioned and strike any references. I think what I would say is if it's CDC not fully vaccinated, strike the whole sentence. I'm not gonna edit what the CDC says. So I would, I mean, if you were doing the board meeting, I think that is 2 could be motions with the edits 1, motions with edits 1 and 2. Or none of those things, and you can make your own motion.
What if we had like an exhibit? CDC recommendations.
Would you be okay with that? Like one page, just
If we did
CDC
An
stuff. on its own
addendum
page.
with CDC.
No, like an
recommendations.
exhibit or something,
Yeah.
like. just
CDC recommends this.
this,
And
like as of this date, this is what, because I think some people like to see
I agree
that.
with that.
I think
I
that's a
still
good
would go
idea.
through and strike.
Yeah,
those CDC
yeah, so we can
recommendations
take
in.
out, those things, but then we can have it, like just in one spot.
Yeah.
And people can do it.
I think it's a good compromise.
Full-
We're not taking that out. It's
fully.
got its own spot. And
And it might be easier to edit
Yeah.
as things change.
They always change.
As I flip through this, I'm gonna question again on page 7.
Okay.
Again, it's quite often, it's wording. Says up there, if the district has more than 10 confirmed active cases, school will operate strictly under the guidance. What does that mean?
So the word strictly isn't like, I guess, completely binding. It could be struck out of there, I guess. My thought in that is, again, that 10 confirmed active cases, it's in the school, that's high spread. Like, look, we're gonna be consulting in that place under the guidance of the local health department. So at that point, I mean, it's just another little bit of, I think it adds a little bit of strength to it to say, look, we get to this level where there's 10 cases or more spreading, we're gonna try and operate under the guidance of the local health department.
Which I agree with that.
Maybe the word
Maybe strictly and only, take strictly and only out saying the schools will operate under the guidance of the local health department.
I mean, I guess, and then maybe it just doesn't need to be there because I think we're kind of operating under that guidance anyways. I talk to Carol regularly. But
okay, so now for our options.
yeah, I think it sounds like an agreeable to add it to an addendum. So I would say the option would be to take the edits and not worry about the CDC thing. That would be option 1. To take the edits and move the CDC things to an addendum. I would, the other one that I had, that didn't sound too helpful. So that would be it. And now there's this new one, if you want to remove the word strictly or remove that, strike that sentence. That would be a third thing, I guess.
Maybe just go strictly. They're operating under their guidance.
Well, I'm gonna say it's just I guess how it's worded, it's kind of like, it seems like it's tying our hands that we've said that we will only follow their guidance, and I'd rather we have a leeway to.
It's
Oh,
on
that's
Seven.
page 7. Yeah,
At
it's
the
like
top,
the,
second sentence.
That we'd have the leeway to make some decisions on our own.
okay, so you take out only and strictly, then I suppose if that's how we want that worded, but it still says that we will operate under the guidance of the.
Okay. So that could probably be just added to the list of those edits that I discussed previously.
No,
And then the only other, you could do a separate motion to move the CDC, any CDC guidance to an addendum.
Could you just keep that in all in the same motion?
Yeah, we could make it all one motion. Accept the plan with the edits as discussed, including moving CDC recommendations to an addendum.
So moved.
No, it's coming.
Okay, can I get a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? We have a first and a second. And then let's vote. All in favor of the motion as presented. All opposed? Just 10. Okay. Okay,
Probably
so it's unanimous. Looks like that is the end. Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
A second.
Any in favor?
We have to say aye because we're on mine.
Online as we can. Okay, any opposed? Yeah, so we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Sean, for everything. Good for that committee. Super fun.
You didn't go around through that.
I know.
See you, Ken, thanks.
Hey, guys.